I'm Joe Nye, the Dean of the Kennedy School of Government, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the ARCO Forum of Public Affairs and to the Albert H. Gordon Lecture on Finance and Public Policy. The Gordon Lectures have a long tradition here, and we've had a number of distinguished lecturers. Paul Volcker, who's an alumnus of the Kennedy School, has been one. Dick Darman, who is now teaching at the Kennedy School, has been one. The Honorable James Baker, who worked for a certain illustrious president, has been a Gordon lecturer, as well as Senator Robert Dole, who spoke here last year. But it's a particular honor this year to be able to have President George Bush as this year's Gordon lecturer. I also want to acknowledge Albert Gordon, who is seated right in front here, and who has a quite extraordinary record of his own. Al, if you would just stand for a minute. Al Gordon is a 1923 graduate of Harvard College who's been a member of the Harvard Board of Overseers. But my favorite anecdote, which I just confirmed with him, is he ran marathons into his 80s. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Mike Boland, who's the chairman and CEO of ARCO. ARCO was the original funder and the creator of this forum in which we're meeting, which has become Harvard's premier arena for speech and public policy. Mike. And now to welcome President Bush to Harvard, I'd like to call on President Neil Rudenstein, who's widely admired on campus and beyond, and who's leaving a legacy of pulling Harvard together. Neil?
Thank you, Joseph. Welcome, everyone, particularly welcome Al Gordon. If you can count as fast as I can or as slow, you'll know that the class of 1923 is having its 75th Harvard reunion this year, and Al is leading the charge. On behalf of the university, I'm particularly honored to welcome President George Bush and his wife Barbara today. It's a privilege to have you join us, and we thank you for taking the time. You've led our country through difficult times with great integrity and with the kind of thoughtfulness and steadiness that are all too rare today. And that, in fact, has distinguished, as I read it, your entire career in public service, from the House of Representatives to the White House. Your own commitment to public service and to education represent exactly the values that this Kennedy School of Government seeks to inculcate in all of its students, hoping to train for the future generations of not only American students, but people from abroad for leadership in the world at large. We want to thank you for coming. We look forward with great interest to your talk, and we also understand that you are on your way after you leave for your 50th reunion for another institution who's somewhere in the South, I think, whose uniform you appear to be wearing. I'll trade ties with you. Oh, mine is blue too, yes. I think the only last remark would be that I know well that President Bush, up until his 80s, used to play baseball. And in spite of this year's record in the Ivy League, I think they still do have a team down there. And I hope you get a chance to hit a few out of the park.
And now to introduce President Bush, let me call on Senator Alan Simpson, Senator of Wyoming, now Director of the Institute of Politics, and a widely popular teacher here at the Kennedy School.
Fellow students, oh no. It is a great pleasure for me this afternoon, a rare treat to be here and introduce a friend. I'm President Rudenstein, Sir, it's good to have you here, and Dean Joe, and Al Gordon. What a man. With strong ties to my native state of Wyoming. Wonderful to have you with us in this lecture that bears your name. And Mike Boland, Chairman, CEO of ARCO, COO, CEO, Chairman, you name it, in this forum that bears your company's name here. And Barbara Bush, wow, wonderful to have you here. You energize us with your presence, for you were and are one vibrant, joyful, vital, spirited First Lady. And the country loved you then and loves you now. You are a force for good in this land. And you were there for me when the mortar shells were falling into my foxhole. And I was dug in, a source of strength and honest counsel, nurture and wisdom. I have leaned on that shoulder right next to me. And now to George Bush. I met this man in 1962 when Al Gordon was winning marathons. 36 years ago, my father, Millward Simpson, was elected to the U.S. Senate and took over the office of one Prescott Bush, the senator from Connecticut. They transferred offices and transferred staff, and that's where I met George and Barbara. Dad took 4 of Prescott Bush's top people on his staff, wonderful staff they were. And I say to you, George and Barbara, how we miss staff when we get out of public life. It's called staff deprivation. And Ann, who you know and love, she said to me, Al, your staff is gone. They are not here. And I am not one of your staff. And it's a strain on a 44-year marriage. But there's a biblical precedent for this. It states right there in the good book that Jacob died leaning on his staff. Now, enough of that. Yeah, wait, we're going to get you. Then, when my father and mother left the Senate, George and Barbara Bush had just been elected to Congress. Well, actually, George had been elected to Congress, and they bought my parents' home in Washington, D.C. on a handshake, confusing the lawyers, the real estate personnel, and the banker. But that is the way the Bushes and the Simpsons have done their business, a handshake, a trust, fathers and sons. And then, of course, the vice presidency and the presidency, and I was there in the thick of it. 12 wondrous years, 10 as assistant leader to Bob Dole. And Bob Dole was the most staunch loyalist to George Bush and a supporter of this man. You can check the voting record. Sheila and I can vouch for it. Bob Dole supported this man more than anyone, including your introducer. And I paid for that sometimes, too. But the one word that capsules George Bush and my leader when I was in the Senate, one trait, one word, and that word is loyalty. The one word that bound them together with hoops of steel, and therein lies the inner gyroscope of George Bush. Loyalty to his country, loyalty to his family, loyalty to Barbara Bush and to his 5 wondrous children and their wonderful spouses. In an epitaph of some unknown day, many a moon from now, and the moving finger having writ moves on, it will be one word, loyalty. Loyalty to Ronald Reagan, loyalty to his friends. You learn a lot about a man when you hike and camp and fish and hunt, and yes, we do that in Wyoming and Texas. And we learn about the essence of fairness and competitiveness and good sportsmanship and civility and grace and a zest for life. Why else would a man fling himself from an airplane at the age of 73 to the quizzical wonderment of his bride of 52 years for closure, a deep wish unfulfilled and now filled. Done. Over. That's George Bush. Never seen him hold a grudge, never seen vindictiveness, vituperation. I would say that you want to get a good rest when you do these things with him, because you hope and pray for darkness to come, because he will be casting and shooting into the dark. His credentials are well known. I won't even cover them. I just say this is an extraordinary man, man of grace and courage and caring and decency. One of the most decent men I have ever known, in or out of public life, my friend George Bush, 41st President of the United States.
Thank you, Al. Very nice. No. Thank you all. Al, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Al, so very much for that exceptionally warm introduction. And I too want to salute various people he has saluted, particularly starting with the president of this great university. We're honored that he's here. I was surprised and pleased. I mean, I thought this was kind of a passing thing, and here we have all the horsepower of this university and of this great school. And Joe, whom I have great respect for, the dean, Sheila Burke, Al Simpson, so many others that to whom I feel very, very close are here with us today. Got a lot of family here, almost outnumbering the students, not quite. I'm pleased to be a part of the ARCO Forum. Mike Boland and I go back a long, long way too. He flew all the way here from the West Coast for this. I'm told that people are actually hanging from the rafters up here. It's a lot better than what happened to me when I was hanging out of Vanderbilt Hall at Yale the last time I was there, but nevertheless, you know, dummy with a thing around the neck. But I see what it means to be received very, very warmly, and I appreciate it. Most of you know I've had a little bit of an identity crisis lately. It appears that I'm either married to the most popular woman in the United States of America or the father of the governor of Texas, one or the other. Now, wait a minute. I used to be president of the United States, and that's the terrible thing that's happened. I, of course, am thrilled that this is the Al Gordon speech, the Al Gordon lecture. What an inspiration he has been to me and to my brothers and my father and my family all through his life. As for Al Simpson, the other Al in our presence, he said it all there about our relationship. It is what matters. I told Al I don't normally give lectures, especially when the format is kind of a public debate. In the finest tradition of the Greek philosophers, where you get questions and all of that. I remember Socrates, great philosopher that he was, used to go around lecturing people, giving advice all the time, and they poisoned him. My favorite, though, is the man for whom this school was named, Jack Kennedy, speaking to a group of financial people. He said, if I weren't president, I'd be buying stock right now. Business guy in the back said, yeah, if you weren't president, I'd be buying stock right now. So I'm delighted to be here and delighted to see so many people with whom I served in Washington, a part of our team. They were good people, and I was blessed to have a team of such wonderful minds, men and women of great integrity, great honor, motivated only by service to country. Those of you who have worked with the ones I'm talking about
know that I was very blessed, and I believe that our nation was blessed by their service. And they served with honor. We had a clean administration. They served with dedication. And I was proud to have them at my side as we confronted a world in the midst of historic change. When the Berlin Wall fell, I was talking to the dean about this a few minutes ago, when Germany was unified and remained in NATO, when the Soviet Union actually came apart at the seams, imploded, and gave way to a democratic Russia, and when our Warsaw Pact dissolved before our eyes, the Cold War receded into history as Eastern Europe was free, the Baltic states free. And let us not forget that during those 4 years when I was privileged to be your president, a lot of good things happened in this country. I will readily concede I made plenty of mistakes, but we cleaned up the S&L crisis, huge expenditure, but now it looks back, it appears it was the right thing to do. Cleaned up our environment with the Clean Air Act revisions, expanded more opportunities for 37 million Americans with disabilities when, in a very bipartisan way, Congress passed the ADA, and I was privileged to be the president that signed it, and some in this room, Dick and others were, and Roger Porter, very instrumental in the passage of this. We forewent the reading of lips by passing a budget agreement that did put firm controls, really for the first time, on discretionary spending, federal spending with a cap for the very first time. And as I say, through it all, I had a great team at my side. So I'm not surprised that they've ended up here in this School of Excellence. It takes good people to make a good administration. It takes quality people to make a great school. And of course, the Kennedy School is so well respected all around the world. The work being done here is a worthy legacy of President Kennedy, who inspired so many young people to get involved in public service. It was John Kennedy who said political action is the highest form of citizenship. And I couldn't agree with that more. And I know those of you who, with the JFK School, share this sentiment. I know you must agree with those words. Indeed, I did a little homework and found your commitment to public service written in black and white in your mission statement. I can hardly think of more important work for an active, engaged citizenry in the lifeblood of a dynamic democracy. The trouble is, if we believe what we read in the papers and see on the news, more and more Americans are being turned off by the political process. And it seems that more and more people are tuning Washington out. And it's not hard to understand why. Day after day, there are these reports of, sleaze and scandal, and only to be caught up in the maelstrom of personal attacks and counter charges. Each new charge, each new innuendo contributes to the escalating rancor. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm talking about the climate, political climate in our nation's capital. At best, it's an unseemly spectacle for the nation that conceived modern-day democracy, whose Constitution is a blueprint for individual rights and liberty around the world. It's unbecoming for the sole remaining superpower upon whom our friends around the world rely for moral leadership. And naturally, I worry about this. I worry because I don't want to see the well of public discourse poisoned. I don't want to see good people lose their confidence or their trust in government. And I don't want to see a healthy skepticism about politics give way to a divisive cynicism. And most of all, I don't want a deficit of decency to keep good people from wanting to get into what Teddy Roosevelt most appropriately called the arena. You see, despite the current environment, I still believe, and I believe it passionately, that public service is a noble calling. And I still believe that good people must get involved and must help lift the lives of other people. I know a lot of young people have found themselves in your position where you're actively considering getting involved in the political process, working to prepare yourself for it. Well, I know there are young people who've looked at the current state of politics and decided that it's not for them. They've kicked the tires, tested the waters, and decided to take a pass. And some of this has to do with the intrusive nature of the national press. I'm not going to go into that. For one thing, we have an expert here. Al Simpson is the expert on the national press. Expert media critic right here. And I recommend you read his terrific book. It screams bestseller. I don't know whether it's sold much, but it screams bestseller. If you don't want to do that, take his class. But the other reason I can't go after the press is I've been doing it. I confess to these guys in the holding room here. I've been having a wonderful time going all across the country, knocking the socks off the national press. 15,000 people in Utah, 17,000 people in St. Louis, and I'd hit the national press, and they'd all scream up and stand up and scream and clap. And then I got a letter from a friend of mine down in Washington, a guy named Vic Gold, who created for Spiro Agnew the nattering nabobs of negativity. He himself knows one when he sees one, but he wrote me and he said, stop bashing the press. It's beneath you. So I'm not here to criticize the press. Indeed, I've joined Press, but this is the truth, Press Bashers Anonymous. It's been 10 days since I joined, and I'm going through withdrawal symptoms, but I think Vic's advice was right. So, as Dana Carvey would say, not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent. So, tell you something about that little guy. He must miss me. He made a killing off of me. But there are many reasons why some people are apathetic about the political process. The economy's doing well. Progress we've made in addressing some of the fiscal problems that plagued us in recent times. Some apparently feel that most events in Washington have little impact on our well-being as a nation, even less relevance to their own lives. And that's what makes the work of this institution, Joe, this school, this Kennedy School of Government so vital, so critically important. I know there are many disciplines here that cover a broad range of our national political life, but everyone who comes here learns the same thing, that public service makes a difference. And it's the same thing students learn at political science graduates. Undergraduate schools are now proliferating around the country doing this. We have one just starting at Texas A&M, where my presidential library is, George Bush School of Government and Public Service. And I figure if we can just inculcate this sense of service into a handful of kids there, we will be doing the Lord's work. We're hosting academic conferences. Indeed, I invited Kiichi Miyazawa, the former Prime Minister of Japan, to come there and speak. He was the guy I threw up on in Tokyo. Do you remember him? But he came, and I told him, this time the dinner's on me. So the main focus, but I enjoy going to our little school, sharing thoughts on public service with them. I've always been one who believes that actions speak louder than words. Unlike my dear friend, mentor in many ways, Ronald Reagan, I was not a great communicator. In many ways, I wish I had been. But I always thought that action has its own eloquence. Speeches can be important, but actions matter too. And that's because actions speak volumes about who you are as a person. Actions go to the heart of character. And over the course of your career, I hope each of you is fortunate to do different things, to go different places, accept new challenges. But at the end of the day, when the dust is settled in the arena where you fought and given it your best, remember this, that character endures. And there are just a few observations gleaned from 35 years in and out of public life. And during that time, I learned the good you can do through public service, that policies affect lives. I learned how public service can help achieve social progress, offering an opportunity to pursue happiness as their God-given right. But most of all, I learned that some of the values are timeless, and some ideals are worth fighting for. Let me put it this way. When I leave here this afternoon, I am getting on that New Haven-bound train and going to my 50th anniversary college reunion. It's funny, I can't remember where I had lunch yesterday, but I do remember something way back from my college days. I remember it distinctly. The last baseball game I played in, 1948, playing against Harvard at Yale Field during what's known as reunion weekend. And for some reason, I'll never forget the sight of that 50-year reunion class that came parading into the ballpark. There they were, a bunch of old guys, rejoicing in seeing friends, glad to still be alive. Most of them marched in that day were alive. And I suspect, Al, the class of 1898 at Harvard on their reunion day back in 48 was exactly the same. A lot of goodwill that day. The old boys marched in, had a spring in their step. Let's face it, they looked awful old, and with good reason. They'd been through a lot. As the class, it's hard to get a grasp of history here. The class of 1898 graduated, and many went right away to fight in the Spanish-American War. Then they watched as flight began, the Wright brothers. Soon after that, Henry Ford introduced the automobile. 20 years following their graduation, they agonized over the war to end all wars, World War I, which ground up a lot of their classmates who helped defeat Germany's aggression then. And 30 years out of school, they were seized and some destroyed, ripped apart by the Great Depression. And as the class of 1898 celebrated its 40th anniversary, they saw Hitler, unchecked, ready to race through the lowlands. And before long, free nations fell beneath the Nazi brutes, while we and others stayed on the sidelines saying no Americans to fight abroad. That was the cry back then, kind of isolation, selfish protection, you might say. And 45 years after they left, they saw their sons and daughters fight in World War II, a fight to end German fascism, Japanese imperialism. But as they came together for that 50th reunion, hopes had been lifted with the end of World War II and the founding of the United Nations. And still, as the class of 1898 began to fade from the scene, the dark shadows of the Cold War began to stretch across Europe. And before long, it would envelop Africa and Asia and Latin America. And my class, as I said, was 1948. Most of us here at this school and at mine immediately joined up to serve in World War II. And of course, we saw many of our classmates ground up in that war. We saw the horrors of war and the joy of victory. And we watched as our nation, in victory, embraced our former enemies and helped them rebuild their countries and nurture their new democracies. We saw TV begin. We didn't have TV when I was a kid. Lucky boy. We saw TV begin with Ed Sullivan, Milton Berle, and Lucy. And in time, magazines like 60 Minutes come along. And then recently, the one who scratches herself, Roseanne Barr, Jerry Springer. What a wasteland. What a terrible wasteland. All progress, thus, is not for the better. My class saw the Cold War intensify. The Soviet tanks crushed the freedom fighters in Eastern Europe. And that monstrous obscenity, the Berlin Wall, divided a great country. We saw the threat of nuclear war as two superpowers faced each other down. The communists said, "We're going to bury you." And our response was, "No, freedom will prevail." And we witnessed two ghastly wars, Vietnam and Korea. And the latter conflict, well, Vietnam particularly, divided us like nothing since the Civil War. But then came Desert Storm that united our country, raised respect for the United States around the war, and mysteriously and wondrously healed the wounds inflicted upon many who served in Vietnam. That world, we lived blanketed with fear over nuclear fallout, obsessed with superpower conflict. What I would say to you who are about to leave this sacred campus or come back next fall or whatever, be here as students, that world really is no more. A new era has dawned, and as we look ahead to the next millennium, today's students have a shot at a world that is much more peaceful, much more prosperous, clearly much freer. There is a new world order, but it has more free countries and more democracies. It's not perfect. And India's recent testing to the contrary notwithstanding, much less apt to be engulfed in a nuclear Armageddon. All of this is true. All of this optimism, all of these opportunities provided one thing, that the United States lead, and that we not listen to this new strange coalition of the left and the right in politics, Labor and some of the Democrats on the left, some of the Republicans on the right, some strange voices like Ross Perot orbiting over the whole damn thing, saying, come home, America, we've done our part, let somebody else lead. One way to get right back in the kind of crises faced by the class of 1898 and the kind of crises faced by the class of 1948 is to forego our leadership and listen to that selfish siren's call. You see, it's up to you to shape the world to come, to secure the peace, to defend freedom, to help your nation, to lift somebody else up, to help solve these social problems that are plaguing our great country. It's up to you to really be inspired to leave the world a better place. And as for me, I know I speak for Barbara when I say we're never adequately going to be able to thank the American people for the many opportunities that I was given, that in essence we both were given, to serve our great nation. We got some things right, and we're probably some things we could have done better, but I hope we honored the trust. I hope we honored the sacred trust that was placed in us. I can tell you we tried hard. But now that we've had our chance, we're proud to see these others stepping to the fore. And of course, in our family, I'll leave out partisan politics here, but the joy that Barbara and I get after the ups and downs and the turmoil of our own political lives, the joy we get in the fact that two of our sons are trying, are in that arena, giving it their best shot, knows no bounds. They, like many of you, are the future of this country, which is why I am a confirmed optimist that wonderful opportunities and better days lie ahead. You're moving into a next millennium that has all kinds of promise, so don't you blow it. Stay involved and lead, and thank you very, very much. And good luck to all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Now, wait a minute. Here. Until the dean puts a hook on me, I will either respond to your questions or dodge your questions because, wait a minute, it used to be, this is the way it used to work, Joe. No matter where you were, whether it was the press, students, whatever, thank you for that good question. Thank you very much. Now, if I don't like it, hell with you. I'm not going to answer it. So go ahead. What do you want to say?
Hey, let me just explain the ground rules. There are two microphones on the floor here. You can line up behind them. Let me remind you that questions are short, to the point, and end with a question mark, and they come one per customer. And please identify yourself before you ask your question.
Mr. President, my name is Scarden Baker. I'm a student at the business school. I want to tell you I had the great opportunity to be your son's speechwriter in Texas for about a year before I came back to school. And I remember very distinctly during the war being in officer candidate school and then letting us turn on the TV and watch you give that speech that day that we decided to go to war against Iraq. And I was a little nervous, and I was like, well, you know, I think I'm ready if the call comes. And I have a brother now who's captain in the Army, and he's facing these same issues. And he said to me the other day, he said, I don't feel like we're training as much as we used to. And it was just sort of an impression of his, but I'd like to get your impression of whether you think we're prepared to meet our leadership role as a military leader.
I'm not sure about levels of defense spending. I think we ought to look at it. Some people say, well, why do you need it? Why do you need intelligence? There's no more superpower. Who's the enemy? Russia says to us, who's the enemy? We're not your enemy, and I think they're not. But the enemy is unpredictability, as we saw in Iraq. It is instability, as we're seeing in some parts of the world, maybe in the subcontinent this very minute. It is international terror. It is narco-trafficking. It is the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And so there's plenty of enemies. And I can't comment on your brother's statement, but my conviction is that we must not let down our guard, and we must continue to lead, as I said, and you can't do it unless your forces are credible. You cannot help be a stabilizing force if your words are empty. And so I just hope that the Congress and the White House will not cut into the muscle of the training funds or the muscle of our defenses. Who knows where the next enemy will crop up? We go on this side?
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Thiessen. I'm a senior at the college. My question has to do with, for the first time in my life, had the opportunity to go to Europe earlier this week. Came back last night, partly to go to a dance, partly to come see you. And I found it very interesting hearing different leaders in Europe at this conference talk about European monetary unification and the countries of Europe coming together. And I was wondering if you would give us some of your concerns and optimism in that process.
Well, on the current common currency, what's amazed me is that countries like the French, the franc, and the Germans with the Deutschmark, and the Italians with the lira, and UK with the pound, certainly would give up their currencies for a common currency, the euro. I happen to think that the United States doesn't really have, as Howard Baker used to say, have a dog in that fight. We live with however it emerges. Whoever's in the participating in the euro, that currency will trade. I don't view it as bad for the United States of America, provided no trading bloc emerges where barriers then go up and that huge market kind of keeps other people out. I am a little concerned about stability in Europe generally. Obviously, the Balkans is still a worry spot, and we can't claim to be too heroic there, because I was unwilling, after sending 500,000 Americans abroad, to send another 135,000 to the Balkans. But I'm concerned about Europe, but I'm basically much more optimistic than I was, mainly because of the unification of Germany, something that I had to work very closely with Gorbachev to achieve, and something I had to work closely with Margaret Thatcher and Francois Mitterrand to achieve, because they were very worried about a unified Germany inside. There was concern that Germany, Joe, as you may remember, would not join NATO. And Germany is in NATO, and Germany is unified, and I think they have earned their right to be a solid, respected European country. So basically I'm optimistic, but with the concerns I've just mentioned.
President Bush, thanks to President Reagan's and your administrations, we do not, as you mentioned, have a nuclear threat in the east or the west. But it didn't make most of the papers this morning. But Pakistan did test nuclear weapons this morning in their hills, and so it's threatening an arms race in the Indian subcontinent, where I'll actually be precariously traveling this summer as a journalist. My question is that we, in the United States and the Soviet Union, learned our lessons and learned to disarm only after the long, drawn-out arms race and the Cold War. Should we let the Indian subcontinent learn the lessons for themselves? Should we teach them these lessons, or should we punish them, as President Clinton has chosen to do?
They should have learned the lesson, both countries. We've had, up and down relations with Pakistan. I'll never forget a man who was General Zia, who was head of Pakistan, looking me right in the eye and saying, on my oath of office as a military, my honor as a military man, I can tell you we're not acquiring nuclear weapons. we knew they were, and I told him that we knew they were. So there's been deceit, and it's been on both sides. We saw what India did. And no, I don't think we ought to sit back and let that happen. I think we ought to mobilize the best possible diplomatic effort with sanctions if needed to try to bring both these countries to their senses. And the big worry that I have here is how will China react? You don't want to see it. It's bad enough to have it between India and Pakistan. It would be worse if this whole kind of race you're talking about escalates to China. So I think all of us, including the Russians and the Chinese, should be actively involved in trying to talk sense to India and Pakistan to have it stop right where we are.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, President Bush. My name is Dan Winton. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. What do you think is the most important legacy of the Clinton administration so far, and what do you think is the most major disappointment?
Only one of each. Well, the most important legacy, I would like to say the economy, but I would also like, my mother always said, George, don't brag on yourself. I called her once out from Andover here. I said, Mother, I scored 3 goals in soccer. She said, how did the team do? We had a good team wrestling with the economy, and three of whom, maybe I can't see them all, are sitting here, and we handed the administration an economy that in the last quarter was growing at 5.8%, that grew in excess of 3% for the whole year, and I wasn't good enough to convince the American people that we were anything other than a depression. And there was, of course, this huge quest for change. Having said that, somewhat defensively, I can't think of what I would credit the present administration with for the economy, but clearly if I were sitting down there, I'd be taking enormous credit for it, because I don't know that it was a huge tax increase that did it, or the election of a Republican Congress in 1994 that helped, and it did. But if I would say, looking at it, just trying to be objective, the economy, they're doing very, very well on the economy. Shortcomings, I would leave out some of the subjects, but I would think that I don't think we've been particularly even-handed in the Middle East, and that worries me very much. Leave it there.
Mr. President, my name is Sam Aboud, and I'm here at the Harvard Business School. And instead of talking about President Clinton's legacy, I would like to talk about your legacy. And if you had to pick one major accomplishment, whether in your private or public service life, what would that be?
Well, if you're talking about events, I think history will probably look to Desert Storm because of the disparate coalition that we put together, and because the military, when the politicians defined the mission and then got out of the way, fought and won the war and established a moral principle. Aggression, big country with the 4th largest army in the world, is not with an impunity going to take over his neighbor. So I think people will say that. But what I hope they say is that we did it with honor. We upheld the integrity of the White House.
My name is Joanne Fan. I'm a second year at the Kennedy School. I would like to appreciate your presence here. And President Clinton is scheduled to be in Beijing in June. Given what my colleague just said about Pakistan just advanced to the 8th nuclear power, and 3 of them are in Asia, and that Taiwan Strait remains a very uncertain area for future stability as well. What's your advice, given that you've been to Asia many times as well, and to the president who's about to go, what's your advice to President Clinton?
I think he ought to go to China. I think he ought to never back off of our values, of our commitments, of our convictions, but I think it would be a big mistake for him not to go to China. I am not a China basher. I believe the one bilateral relationship that can adversely affect this optimism and this peace that I'm projecting for your post-Harvard days would be if we screw up the U.S.-China relationship. I think it's that big, and I think it's that important, and they can be. I see Ambassador Lilly here, who served there. He knows a good deal more about it than I do. But I am telling you that if we neglect it, or if we continually bash to feel good, in spite of the things that they're doing wrong, we make a huge mistake. The way to do it is, I noticed that the Dalai Lama joined dissident Wang in saying we ought to stay involved and we ought not to cut off trade and all that with China. That is my view. And I fought like hell with the Democratic Congress. 3 times they tried to override my veto to continue MFN for China. And we were right. And I can tell you this, there are far more human rights and individual liberties in China today, by far, than when Barbara and I lived there as the equivalent of your ambassador in 1974, 1975. Is it perfect? No. Are they democratic? No. Are these Jiang Zemin and others dedicated Marxists? No, they're not. They're totalitarians, but they've done remarkable things that have raised the standard of living, and so I think we ought to stay involved with them. I think President Clinton should go. I think it's sickening if they did, as alleged, try to give money to the Democratic National Committee. Hell, at least they could have given it both sides. I mean, no, there's a terrible... Please cut that out of there. I haven't bashed one single one of you guys in the press. Now get that film and erase it. No, I'll say this. I find it very difficult to believe that anybody would do something that's not in the security interests of this country for a contribution to a political party.
Do you think he should be at Tiananmen Square?
Sorry.
Mr. President, Don Clary, I'm a 1977 graduate here, so it's been a while. This week, there was a lot of self-congratulation about the budget deficit disappearing and surpluses as far as the eye can see. And everybody's trying to take a little credit. One of the things that I think is missing, and in my opinion, over taxes or whatever it is the fact that we're spending so much less confronting a nuclear power on the other side. I would say, and I would like your opinion and comment, that you and Ronald Reagan together managed the fall of communism, which in turn has allowed us to have a peace dividend which more than covers the deficit.
I'm not sure of your figures. Maybe if I was asked for an expert, I could ask Dick. But in the theory, I couldn't agree with you more. And they talk about the cuts in employees. Most of the cuts in the employees have come out of the defense side. It's fine. We don't need to be armed to our teeth, but we got to stay armed. Is my point. And I think history will sort all this out. And I think your premise is correct.
President Bush, Dean and I, Jack Warner, I work with my post-Harvard years with the cities and county associations nationally around the country on sustainable communities. You were a leader for us and with us on the Clean Air Act. Can you provide us at the community level as well as the administration support for passage and the achieving of the goals that are being talked about through the Kyoto Protocol and the protocol agreements that are being looked at as far as global climate change?
I don't know enough about it. I'll tell you, it's one of the things that's wonderful about being retired. I don't keep up with the details, so maybe I should be embarrassed to say this. I just don't know about the Kyoto protocols. I just haven't followed it that closely, so I can't say whether I'd be for it or against it.
Mr. President, can I welcome Governor Salucci, who's just arrived?
Yay, Paul. How are you, Governor? Good to see you. Ever since this guy helped me in politics in 1978, he's been known for the dramatic entrance. Nice to see you, Governor. Who's next?
President Bush, I'm Richard Sobel, and I try to understand the relationships between leaders and citizens. You've alluded to Desert Storm, a little bit to Bosnia. You also talked about the American people's perception of the economy during your administration. I wonder if you could give us some insights into your thinking. In the fall of 1990, the United States faced building a coalition because of the aggression in Iraq. At the same time, the American public saw the economy as weak. How did the perceptions of the American people about each of these crises figure into your decision-making to go forward in an important coalition?
Well, I'm not sure I can give you an easy answer. I almost had them as two separate things. I felt in the fall of 1990 we were going to have to do whatever it took to end the aggression. And as you know, and as history will show, we tried to do it peacefully. We tried to go to the United Nations. We tried all the diplomacy we could. I talked endlessly with Gorbachev about his efforts to work with Saddam Hussein. We tried at the beginning of the invasion, we talked about an Arab solution, which the Arabs were saying to me back in August, we can do this. That was separate and apart. It never occurred to me that because the deficit was big and because the economy was in recession, close to it, I can't remember the months, that we ought not to send another 250,000 men abroad. We tried to separate out this major national security problem, or I did, maybe others didn't that helped me in all this, from these domestic problems. But on the perception of the people, I don't know, because, you know, I made an unpopular decision regarding taxes. It cost me a ton. But that did not adversely affect in 1990 all these dreadful polling standards. Are you popular or unpopular? Are you for him or are you against him? And those polling numbers remained very, very strong, even when we had to make the budget agreement. So I don't know how you measure public opinion at that time. I felt in Desert Storm that we had more support from the people than we did from the Congress. I know we did. Because you remember the key vote on the UN, at the Congress was 53 to 47, almost on party lines. And I say that with no bitterness, but I'm just telling you that's the way it was. Later on, to their credit, they all supported us once the battle began. On the economy, I think that people were strongly for the budget agreement. But certainly there was some political downside to it that really affected things as we went into the '92 election. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Aaron Goldzimmer. I'm a student here. I have a question about human rights. Many of us in the human rights community feel a lot of pain having witnessed our country arm and train and otherwise support regimes that have killed hundreds of thousands of people. And you were present in various roles during the end of the Cold War and much of the time as vice president and director of the CIA. And I wanted to ask, you know, what your reflections on that subject are. Do you have any thoughts and any regrets?
So thoughts about supporting bloody dictators, you mean? It would help me if you'd say which ones. Just so you're talking about China?
No, but thinking.
See, my opponent came in talking about the bloody so-and-sos of Beijing. Bush is catering to these people. Right. Got into office and saw that we better stay involved with it. But
I'm thinking Central America, Indonesia, which has continued, we just learned this month, after the Cold War.
Okay, Central America, I'm very happy that we supported those who preferred democracy. We went down there and brought to justice a international narco trafficker, Noriega, who had ripped democracy right out of the hands of the people of Panama. And some human rights people got on my case about it. But you go down there today and they have elections and they're free. And so I'm very proud of that one. The supporting of the of the Contras, the people that were for democracy in Nicaragua, for that, and you ended up seeing free elections and saw them kick these Sandinistas right out on their neck. So it depends. What was the other one you mentioned?
Indonesia, Guatemala.
Well, sometimes you got to dance with who's there. You can't try to overthrow everybody, and so I don't know. Suharto obviously is not going to be respected for human rights. He is going to get credit eventually for bringing Indonesia out of the Dark Ages, and he overdid it, and he's gone. I mean, so a good example would be of your point would be Romania, where we dealt with Ceausescu. Because he was counterbalanced and less involved in all the Warsaw Pact countries in the orbit of aggressive Moscow. And so we did do that. And, you know, you can argue whether we should have or not. I think the answer to your question is the world isn't perfect. You sometimes are dealing with imperfection. You're dealing with choices that require two evils. Which one is less bad? Or you're dealing with the question, what is in the national security interest or the national interest of the United States of America? And sometimes that leads one, in spite of violations of human rights, to deal with unsavory people. Some people are giving Clinton hell for not changing the policy in Cuba. But Cuba's human rights record has been oppressive. So there's one where perhaps we could say to human rights community, some of whom, oddly enough, want us to change the policy towards Castro now, and I say us, President Clinton to do it, hey, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. It's a tough one because you're never dealing with perfection. You're dealing with nations who have flaws and who might be strong in one area and be visibly and deplorably weak in another.
Hi, President Bush. My name is Daniel Rosenberg, and I'll be graduating from the Kennedy School in about a week or so. And my question is about leadership, as you indicated in your speech, American leadership in foreign policy. It seems that two of the challenges are, one, building coalitions, and we're having difficulty doing that today, and also deciding what values are important to us, and whether stopping genocide when there are no security interests is also important. And I was wondering if you could comment on the role of American leadership in building coalitions, or either doing social policy in foreign affairs.
Well, I think sometimes, let's put it this way, you can't be the world's policeman. You can't solve every problem between the Hutus and the Tutsis. It's been going on forever, and it's going to continue. You can try. We went into Somalia. I was criticized for the changed mission for the military. I got Colin and Dick Cheney came over. Barbara was with me. And he said, what's the mission? I said, the mission is to end the starvation, period. Not going to be peacekeepers, not going to be peacemakers. End the starvation. How much? He says, 28,000 U.S., I think was the figure he gave me for troops. We sent them in there. We no longer witness those starving 6-year-old little girls being dragged into Mogadishu by their brothers. And that wasn't any strategic reason for that. We were doing something that I felt was a noble mission. I talked to a Marine over there on New Year's Day, 1993. I said, how do you guys feel about all this, being away from home? We are doing the Lord's work, sir. And they were. And so it's such a broad question that I don't know I could give you. We need time to answer it, but it's a profound question. And you just have to keep in mind the prime interest, well-being of the United States and the security, and then try to form these coalitions. Desert Storm was a clear example of a disparate coalition coming together. The lack of coalition in the recent run-up to a confrontation with Saddam Hussein was, I think, 70% because of the Middle East itself, because we were seen as to not being fair to both sides. Now, a lot of people might not like to hear that, but that is my view, and I don't believe. That's why I think you saw a lot of those Arab nations leaving the administration. So you got to work at it. You got to stay working at it, and it is never easy. But I would make this further comment. Never underestimate the power of the telephone or what a personal contact means. I came into office, and I believe it was Hosni Mubarak of Egypt that said, let me give you a little advice. Pick up the phone and call the Emir of Kuwait or the, ruler of the United Arab Emirates. I said, what about? He said, doesn't matter what about. Just call him. You're the President of the United States of America. Ask him how the weather is in the Gulf. And so when we wanted something, when we needed something there or in South America, when we went down to Panama, I was thinking they were going to rip our socks off, those countries, because historically there's huge opposition to the U.S. showing any use of force in this hemisphere. I think we were doing the right thing, and I was amazed at how little reaction we got. And some of that was through, you might say, preliminary coalition by getting on the phone and saying to whoever it was down there, how are things, and I hope you're going to be coming to Washington, or how's the family, and all of that. And Henry Kissinger, I think, disagrees with that. He said nobody will change your position if they don't like you. I mean, because they like you, they're not going to change. That's not the point. What I found later on is, if you make these contacts, you're in a better position to form a coalition, be it regional or global, if you have some personal knowledge of the countries and of their leaders. And if they know you, they'll give you a break. They did when I was ambassador at the UN. A lot of times those ambassadors have no instructions. And so if you know them, you can go, hey, look, Joe, nobody gives a damn about this at home, and we do. Now give us a vote like you did in the Senate or something. And so personal contact in coalition building is very, very important in my view.
This will have to be your last question.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'm Wayne Dennison, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School, at least for the next couple of days.
They're throwing you out, Wayne?
We hope you
Believe it or not, they may be graduating me.
Oh, I see.
How big a threat to the presidential security is the fact that Secret Service agents can now be compelled to testify? And did Kenneth Starr make a mistake in pushing the issue?
Well, my view differs with the view of many others in my own party particularly. My view is the Secret Service was right, and I so advised without anybody asking me to, Lou Merletti, who was the head of the Secret Service. I didn't want it to be interpreted as Starr bashing, because I am not in that mode. I appointed Ken Starr. I respect Ken Starr. I don't like all these orchestrated attacks on Ken Starr. But I know something about the Secret Service, having been had Secret Service protection since 1979. I know how they operate. I have never heard one single agent say one single negative thing about any other protectee, someone he or she has been covering. They are non-political, but what troubles me is the argument that Lou Merletti put forward about proximity. Because if a president thinks he's going to hear, I don't want these boys to be called to hear my son is fighting with my son's wife, and they're right there in the Lincoln bedroom screaming at each other and throwing stuff, and one of them may do something that breaks the law, and I don't think the Secret Service ought to be dragged into all of that. I said in my letter that if there's some real crime involved, serious crime involved, I think, of course they should testify. But to be called in and to hope that they can flesh out a case, I disagreed with the special prosecutor on that, and so advised him. And I put a little covering letter on it. Nothing should be interpreted in this as trying to undermine the Starr investigation, because I have confidence in the man, and I've been offended by the nature of the attacks on him. And so it's a tough call. The judge ruled against this special privilege, and I'm not sure that was an unexpected decision, and maybe, just maybe, because several of us had made the point, particularly with more effectiveness, effectively made by the agents, by the Secret Service themselves, people will understand what the agents are up against, what the Secret Service is up against, and maybe it'll just kind of work out on its own, later on. But I sided with the Secret Service on that one.
President Bush, I want on behalf of the audience thank you for your presidency and your presence here today, and say that while we wish you a very happy 50th reunion at Yale, you'll always be welcome back at the Kennedy School.
Tried.